Welcome to Power Forward. I'm Chris Kroll, editor-in-chief of Solar Builder magazine. Today we close out 2024 and look ahead to solar business in 2025 the way we always do with David Dunlap, VP of Product Strategy with BayWa RE. Hey, David, how you doing?
Hey, Chris, it's great to see you. Good to be here.
I don't know how great of a conversation. I'm not necessarily looking forward to talking about 2025, but we must talk about it. We must get through it. And before we fully look ahead at the uncertain 2025, let's take stock of 2024. Maybe that can help us. From your vantage point, what did you see as the key trends in the market in 2024?
Starting off, it's important, I think, that we just acknowledge we're all a bit tired, a little fatigued. It definitely felt like a year of navigating stormy seas. If that's a good analogy for folks, I think we have proven our resilience and our strength and I think our resolve. Doesn't mean we're not a bit exhausted. And I think that's what a lot of folks in the industry are feeling at this point. The residential market was still soft, sort of a continued slowdown, plagued with quite a number of bankruptcies, both small and large, high profile. A lot of disruption there. Interest rates didn't recover as quickly as we hoped, and a shift in the financing landscape accordingly. You know, we saw a lot of high inventory levels, oversupply, kind of a strong brokerage market, which I think also created some disparities between what manufacturers and distributors were sort of trying to keep a forward look at. Here's what's coming, here's the new technology, here's what we can be excited about. And then there's this oversupply and maybe lower price clearance market, if you will, and oversupply that also needs to be acknowledged and dealt with. So I think people who played that part of the market probably did okay in terms of the on balance of saving some money and utilizing some maybe aging inventory. But I think that we're moving into the new year with kind of some shifting sands there and a little bit of cleaning up of that. There was a lot of emphasis this year on figuring out domestic content. I think that was probably the single largest mind share grab in the industry. And in fact, a lot of people, I think, spent time worrying about it or trying to figure it out, even if it didn't directly apply to them as the company or the official entity that would be utilizing the tax credit. So I think that one took a lot of energy and focus and effort for folks. Two kind of positive outcomes, though, that I think are worth mentioning. One, I definitely felt throughout this year at trade events and in conversations with installers that more solar installers were looking to diversify their business, looking at additional revenue streams, maybe adding service to their portfolio or going beyond only installing a solar generation plant in a building, in a facility. So looking for ways to add value for the same customer and not have to duplicate customer acquisition costs. Those are really positive changes. And yes, it added complexity, and there's a lot of people that are still struggling to kind of figure that out. Not a great year to tackle more nuance and more complexity. And yet, I think that's a really positive thing going forward. And then I also think that any of the policies or incentives that may be in jeopardy, part of the reason that they are in jeopardy is because of the cost effectiveness of solar energy. And I think that we have proven that we've reached or passed a cost parity with other more traditional forms of energy. And that's a good thing for our industry and a good thing for adoption going forward. So I think those are the two bright spots that I'd call out.
Very good wrap up there. And before we move forward, I did want to, as a programming note, say that we aren't going to get too much into domestic content today, only because we have a fuller episode squarely focused on domestic content as kind of our next episode. So we'll be touching on a lot of stuff, but acknowledging that that's a huge thing that people are paying attention to and may need to pay attention to even more going forward, depending on what happens with the IRA and ITC next year.
100%, and it deserves its own space for that.
Absolutely.
Very detailed conversation. Yep.
So you touched on a lot of things that obviously were headlines that we focused on a lot this year, the kind of continued soft residential solar market, the high profile bankruptcies, the ongoing shift to TPO financing. Are there like lasting takeaways from that going forward, or were those just things that happened and now we've kind of right-sized things and we're moving ahead? I guess, what should I take away from that, if anything?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things from the way my brain thinks about it. I'm definitely not a one to sort of focus on the doom and gloom side of it. I think that the continued slowdown and the bankruptcies is a mark of consolidation, and I think consolidation often does end up yielding more stability in our industry. So I see those as an opportunity to kind of strengthen and lean or kind of create a little bit more focused agility, or I don't know, there's a bunch of tag words probably that aren't worth coming up with. But I do think that if those businesses that remain are here because they've navigated these changes, they're more flexible, more agile, and they're focused on creating value throughout the stream, then that's a good stabilizing force in our industry. I think when there's just sort of a boundless opportunity for profit and growth, then you don't necessarily have to run a smart business to be successful. And I think that can lead to some challenges. I think that the whole financing thing is really where a lot of those bankruptcies came from. And there maybe were some first or early generation financing solutions that maybe front loaded projects a little too much, or front loaded the revenue stream for that, and caused businesses not to think about how to build a really strong cash flow business. And I think those days are over. So I think that the changes in the third party financing have shifted that to the money isn't there upfront to spend elsewhere in your business, or to continue to get out over your skis on your debt. To, we want to get the funnel full, we want to get the projects completed and get paid on time, not necessarily paid ahead of the work. But I actually think going into 2025, we have a healthy mix of cash, loan, and lease offerings. And part of our job in the industry is going to be to kind of help differentiate those solutions and line them up to the greatest value for not only the installers, but the end users.
Looking ahead at kind of just the resi market for next year, I saw some optimism like a month or two ago in like a plus 10% range from where we are now. And now I can't tell if that vibe has maintained or not. I'm just curious, the people you've talked to, the numbers and the places you've looked, or how do you see next year turning out? And what will be driving the business in 2025 from your view, and maybe even addressing kind of that mix you just touched on in terms of financing?
I do think that the way that we measure deployed solar, just the amount of DC watts for the panels installed on the roof, is going to continue to show some gaps in actually measuring the amount of business being transacted in our space. Right. So if you add battery storage to an existing PV system, that doesn't show up as a new system, but it could be just as much revenue generation and just as much work for our trade and the business as a new job. So we may have some difficulty in measuring that. I've had some conversations with Wood Mac about that. I don't think we're changing our measurement, but it's just something that I keep in mind, that we can still be doing good, healthy, robust business as an installer, maybe installing fewer jobs, but spending more time on each job and installing more equipment and a more full solution. And I think that's a positive for the industry. Now, if you're a module manufacturer or a racking manufacturer, that may feel like limited opportunity for growth. But to your point, I think that all analysts are saying there should be some uptick. There should be kind of a stabilizing opportunity, and residential should get back on track and grow. I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, the consumer confidence. And most installers are saying that they need to change their conversation at the kitchen table in order to build more trust and more confidence in going solar. So if we take that as the theme, what are the strongest sort of value opportunities to discuss at the table? I mentioned before, I think the prior 5-7 years of, I'm going to reduce your electric bill and I'm going to install a solar generation facility and your electric bill is going to go to zero, sign here, please. I think those days are numbered, if not gone. I think it's more a question about, do you want to take control of your energy future? Do you want energy security? Would you like to be replacing your utility bill with self-generated power, and how do you want to pay for that power? If we just nuance it a little bit more like that, and it's actually going back to 15 years ago, how we had this conversation, why do you need to go solar? Why do you want to go solar? It was often, I don't have access to grid power, right? In the early off-grid days, grid connected became very much an economic discussion. But I think as a consumer, most people want energy stability and energy security. And I think that's a different conversation. So that's something we could lean into as an industry, and really make that, I don't want to say bespoke, because we're not creating something from scratch here, but a customized, tailored solution for what the homeowner actually is finding value in.
That's a good point. And, I was just even thinking Ohm Analytics' recent report on, third quarter results that they were seeing from residential solar and how they were down like 32%, right? So I was like, oh, this is kind of like doom and gloomy. And then you get to the residential storage attachment rates, and that was up by, a crazy amount. So it's like, so there is like this balancing act that maybe it's negative in this column, up in this column. It's like a wash in a certain way, depending on how your business is set up and the market you're in. So I wanted to go back to the bankruptcies that we kind of talked about in 2024 and think about it like this. I'm curious what your take would be. If we were sitting here as we were in 2023, were such things on your mind then? Like, did you think business was at a place where, in 2024, if things don't go right, we could be seeing, some big high profile companies teetering or going out of business? Like, did things feel that precarious then, or was that kind of a surprise?
A little bit of both. I think that, again, I don't consider myself a pessimist. I'm not looking for sort of the worst outcomes or the most likely detrimental things as a risk mitigation strategy. I'm looking more for opportunities and trying to be more of a realist. I consider myself to be looking for what are the realistic chances of things happening. And I think with the downturn, looking at a loss of accelerated growth for a business model that is foundationally dependent upon new originations and kind of boundless growth, that's a problem. And I think any business minded person could have seen that and said, there better be some shifts in how these businesses are organized if they're going to survive a negative funnel, right? A negative growth curve in terms of new originations. If you don't have enough early deposits coming in to pay your past due bills, you're in trouble. So I think there were some early indicators, and there definitely, I remember some conversations and speculation, but it's hard to say, XYZ is going to go out of business because of that. I don't buy into those kinds of predictive or subjective statements. But at the same time, I think there was some conversation and buzz in the industry about who is likely to be in the crosshairs of this change, and what, if anything, are they doing about it now versus hoping that things turn around. And I think what we learned toward the end of 2023 was this is a protracted downturn. This is going to be kind of a low and a long bottom. And that's what we've been experiencing in 24. It's been hard to kind of get back up onto that upward growth curve, but I think we're getting there. And I think that the bankruptcies were just kind of an inevitability of that long protracted slowdown for businesses that were built on a foundation of constant new business acquisition, new sales generation.
If we were sitting here in 2023, we probably didn't fully see, SunPower going bankrupt in 2024. I'm not saying predict what companies go out of business. That's not what I'm saying at all. But like, what are possible pitfalls when we're sitting here next year? When we look back, we're like, we should have saw that maybe coming, or as being a possibility.
Yeah, it's nuanced, isn't it? I think that for me, it's always been a innovative and agile industry. If we are sort of a business model or a business mindset that is inflexible, you're probably not going to survive in the solar coaster environment. I think we've demonstrated enough times over and over that being too rigid in that sort of approach doesn't work in our industry. There's just too many variables, too many challenges. At the same time, I think that we have a tendency to kind of swarm around our industry like a 10-year-old soccer team, right, chasing the ball. And we think that there's one best thing that we all must go do. And I actually think the diversity is our strength. And I think that the most stable companies, whether they be upstream in the manufacturing side or downstream on the installer side, or even in the finance side, are the ones that understand it's not a one size fits all business. Yes, we're all doing solar energy. We're all trying to indirectly, maybe it's not a part of a vision or a mission statement, but provide alternative renewable energy sourcing to our homes and businesses. But it doesn't mean that every project needs to be funded the same way. It doesn't mean that every project has to be include all the same solutions in the same ways. There's a reason that every project needs to be designed and a site survey done, right? There's a reason that there's a little bit of nuance and a little bit of color and flavor to these things. And so I think the most stable business models going forward are the ones that say, we embrace change, we embrace the need for a little bit of diversity and sort of an agile nature. And we understand that maybe there's a good, better, best, or however you want to position choices. And too much choice, too much complexity can be a distraction and can be a challenge. But I think not enough choices is also a problem.
The last thread I wanted to pull on from something you mentioned earlier was the supply. Maybe some of the bets that some manufacturers made about what they thought 2024 would be didn't quite pan out. Where does that sit now, and kind of what does that mean for the beginning part of 2025 or the full year from your view?
Yeah, globally, there is still excess supply in many, many markets, and continuing to kind of put pressure on new manufacturing and pricing. I think in the U.S. it's a little healthier than in Europe as a whole, but I continue to hear weekly about kind of the fresh new deal, particularly on PV modules, but also in some cases in inverters and some other product categories. But I think we're coming to an end on that. And if I had to kind of bet, I would say within certainly the first half of next year, if not first quarter, the lion's share of that excess and oversupply is gone. I also think that the AD/CVD case is making it clear that if you're not following the U.S. trade policy sourcing and supply chain alignment, the cost of importing product will be too high to be competitive. And that's going to cause a mass exodus of a lot of the brands that were represented in the U.S. because of the 2-year presidential moratorium on new tariffs. That's passed now. We're done. And so there's some cleanup and some sort of finalization that has to be done. And there's some inventory here in the U.S. that still needs to be consumed and installed, but it doesn't get backfilled. It's not being backfilled today. So I think that landscape is shifting. It's shifting towards more of an equilibrium and a narrower overall price range on PV that is supportive of directionally U.S. manufactured product or clean as far as the sort of the trade policy standards. So yeah, I think that improves. And I think that some of that trade policy is going to extend into other categories, which is going to have a similar effect where it's not an all-out unregulated race to the bottom kind of a thing, but it's more of a concentration of we want to source our solar equipment supply in the U.S. from these kinds of companies making these kinds of choices, as well as these kinds of investments in the U.S. infrastructure. And short term, that's going to have a price rise effect in a healthy way. I don't think, I know a lot of installers don't like to hear that framed and think that their business is going to get more expensive. But I think many of the low prices have actually been enabled at somebody's net loss, and that's not sustainable. So we do have to find that place where all companies can turn a profit and remain healthy. It can't just be the lowest price ad infinitum, right? That doesn't work.
Time to address, I guess, the elephant in the room. In 2025, we will have a new administration, one that is very likely to be less favorable in terms of renewable energy policy. First, what is your level of pessimism on the policy front?
Not high, actually, Chris, and maybe that'll surprise you, maybe it won't. But here's the thing: what we know about the Republican Party majority and what the IRA and the 45X investment funds have done have been predominantly within red majority states and Republican communities. And they're seeing job creation, they're seeing investments, they're seeing a lot of the things that are very, very near and dear to their agenda. And I don't see them wanting to get rid of that opportunity. Maybe renewable energy being less favored than traditional oil and gas, that's probably a true statement, but I don't think it's sort of an either or. I'm actually hearing a lot of pushback against some of the statements that Trump has made around Republicans saying we want both. We actually do want both traditional energy sources and renewables. They're good business, right? And I think that goes back to the earlier comment about maybe we don't need as many incentives to compete anymore because we've reached that parity. That can be okay, right? If we've reached a point where the cost benefit is sustainable and it's competitive, great. We don't need to continue to invest more funds in making that a true statement. It just is, right? We've innovated. We've made the solutions cost competitive in that way, and the deployment works. And so what we hear from our inside industry lobbyist in DC is that there's a lot of agenda items for the new administration that I think are much higher up the priority list for the first 100 days than broad brushstroke sweeping, kill the IRA, get rid of solar and wind. I don't think that's on the docket. I think what's more likely to happen is we need to raise funds to pay for tax breaks or other things like border security. Where are we going to get that money? We're going to get it from maybe grants and loan programs around solar. There's other ways to get those solar programs installed. So I'm not saying that there won't be some disruption, but I don't think it's a carte blanche, wholesale, clean slate. I also think sort of what we might see in the first 100 days is some indicators about longer term changes. So, we just got in the IRA that 10-year stability of the 30% ITC. Maybe that gets trimmed. But again, if we don't need it 10 years from now, maybe that's not a bad thing ultimately. It feels sort of like a crushing blow, but if our economics are such that, we can still deliver healthy ROIs and provide value, maybe that's okay in the long run. I think a lot of the changes we're going to see directionally are going to be what's the future state beyond 2025. I think what happens in 2025 will be the forward looking. And I think a lot of 2025 from a policy standpoint is kind of set.
Everything you say there, makes sense to me. And I hope kind of most of what you said there stays true. For the purposes of the DG renewable energy space that we're playing in, are there tangible impacts that you think we could actually feel in 2025 related to just a change in administration, whether it's slice and dicing the IRA or just something else that could impact our markets?
Again, this is all just opinion and speculation, but I think that the consensus seems to be that any changes to existing favorable policies like the IRA would be more of a scalpel approach rather than a sledgehammer. And I think that, again, those are most likely going to have an impact in future years. So yeah, I think we'll get some leading indicators in 2025, and particularly first 100 days about where we're headed on those, or what is the opposition force or the difficulty in passing some of those changes. So yeah, we didn't get the stability, the 10-year IRA roadmap that we'd hoped for if there hadn't been a shift in the political landscape. But again, it's a very slim majority. So, and I think that even within both the Democratic and the Republican Party, there are more factions kind of showing up.
So in closing, given all we've talked about today, just any final thoughts, final words of wisdom, any final advice? How should I prepare my solar and storage business in 2025?
I think if we've got fewer choices across the PV landscape, we can focus on the real differentiation between the ones that are here and make choices that maybe can create some stability in our market. If we're not constantly changing our brand selections and our affiliations every week, maybe we can run a tighter business, have more predictability. And then I also think looking for the strong number 2 and number 3 players in each segment instead of expecting, again, back to the soccer analogy, if we're all chasing the number one solution, then if something is disrupted there in terms of supply chain or a policy that attacks that product supply chain, that could be detrimental for a lot of folks. But if we have built in that we're not 100% dependent on that one solution, we've got a 60-20-20 or a 60-30-10 or some kind of a mix, then we can shift that mix, right? We can lean into selling more of the number two and number three options to our customers while we wait for the number one to recover, right? So there's some opportunities there for us to think about how to adjust our business based on that climate.
Great advice, good perspective, some optimism that helped me a little bit, or at least some, just reality of let's just play cool and go forward. And, whether it's solar, whether it's storage, there's more being made in the United States. There's customers that need some or all of those things. It will keep happening, keep going forward. And as wacky as the solar coaster can be at times, it's not going backwards, that's for sure. It continues to move forward, so that's the most important thing here. And David, just thanks for taking the time, as always, to stop by and power forward with us today.
Absolutely, Chris. Best wishes, happy holidays, and look forward to brighter pastures in 2025.